All right, today we're going to be jumping into the 2022 trends for cryptocurrency and what I think is going to happen in the blockchain. This is going to get fun because there's a lot of detail to follow here and maybe some hidden nuggets for where Bitcoin is going to be going. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to TechPath. Let's jump into it today, and that is on a trends report that was released out by Crypto.com. And interestingly enough, what they've done in their research team is they've taken a look at a lot of varieties, some of which have been toward social media, some has been toward regulatory compliance and enforcement at some point. To a certain level, they've gone from a global aspect. And I want to jump to this story, Crypto.com unveiling their predictions for 2022. There are some things that we are going to give you guys that are very specific, that are in conjunction with this particular trend that's been done. And let me jump to some of the points that they were making here in this one. The first point I wanted to hit was nations no longer afford to ignore the growing push toward crypto. Let me zoom in on that so you guys can see it a little bit better. By the public, in many cases, we'll see and expect a friendlier stance toward cryptocurrency. I think this is going to continue to roll out. And we have talked about this here on the show before, about where blockchain executives, when they've addressed Congress and a lot of the lawmakers in DC, many of which have kind of gone the direction of is that the United States essentially is behind in terms of regulation, but also in reference to what's happening on the innovation side of things. So innovation meaning the developers, where the markets are starting to break loose. So metaverse gaming would be a good example. We have very few metaverse and gaming companies outside of Meta coming into this in the United States. Most of those powerhouses are in the Eastern Bloc countries and also in Asia, Pacific Rim. So that I think is going to see a good alignment with what Crypto.com is talking about here. In addition, they talk about in parallel more nations facing high inflationary economy, depreciating currency, obviously affecting that as legal tender. We've already seen this move from El Salvador. Look at the crypto owners and adoption rate in 2021, where you see the percentage of global adoption percentage and then crypto users. Pretty impressive overall when we're talking about almost 300 million crypto users globally, this being globally. 292 million is a drop in the bucket compared to what we've seen in terms of activity in a very short period of time. I want you to look back at this chart because this is a little bit flat. And what I'm looking at is between August right here, 263, we've only gained about 30 million people. But if you look at the beginning of January, 106 million, look the amount of growth we went to there in August. So 263 up 163 million, basically almost a 1.5x or so. So a very great movement in the early half of the year, and I think a lot of early adoption on where crypto is going. We flatlined because of what was a stalled effect on what's happening in Bitcoin, but also I think more regulatory issues from the US. And we'll get into some of those things, but one thing that they are talking about here is they predict that cryptos will become a staple in traditional finance portfolios, and it will become a fixture in the alternative asset class for investment portfolios as a standard. This is a big statement because I think a lot of people have been leaning in this direction, and there are still, to a lot of the hedge funds and big money capital that I talk to, family offices, et cetera, they're already talking about investing into crypto. I'm just wondering to how much of this is baked into 2022. I'm more along the line as that we'll see more growth in terms of retail investors, adoption rate. If we see that kind of adoption rate in retail investors, because I feel like there's a lot of this from a financial or from an institutional side that's baked in a little bit into this growth. They are talking about traditional banks and financial houses like Morgan Stanley, Citi, Goldman Sachs, et cetera, jumping in. And this is something we've talked about on the show a lot. In fact, we had a couple of bankers on that have already taken, the Vast Bank guys that have already taken crypto and implemented into their regional banking system. I think it's just a matter of time before all of these banks will be negotiating deals with these exchanges and putting up a ability to where you can actually buy and acquire crypto right there off of your banking account and your checking account, which will be a big deal in terms of adoption, because that's where I think the growth is going to come from. mark my word, when we look at this next year, we'll go back to this predictions video, is adoption rate will have skyrocketed in cryptocurrency. I would wager that we could double that number again and see a 600 million number by the end of 2022. That would be my prediction, 600 million, if we continue to see the kind of adoption numbers that we're looking at here. If you look at what their institutional adoption of crypto in 2021, traditional banks, financial houses seeking the adoption of crypto, right there's the numbers all the way back into March, Morgan Stanley, Goldman, JP Morgan, and then the latest one right here with Credit Suisse in October, and then a lot of what's going to be coming here in 2022 as well. So you've got mass crypto adoption being fueled partly by the acceleration of the crypto sector, in particular the ever-expanding world of non-fungible tokens. We talk about NFT, blockchain, gaming, and metaverse in a big way because it is going to be a cornerstone of where growth is going to come from. And of course, the markets that really kind of lean into this are not the United States. And I'm going to show you a chart here of countries by both sentiment on overall crypto, including metaverse gaming, and then amplification, but then also sentiment by Bitcoin specifically tied to that cryptocurrency and what countries are leading the way in that. So make sure and hang in for that. Make sure, by the way, you guys should like this video. This is one of the things that we really are trying to do is understand what you guys are looking for. Are you looking for more trends, research data, investment strategies, charts? What would it be that you really are pumped on? So liking videos is really a good way for us to understand. Predicting GameFi, play to earn, being one of the main vehicles for mass conversion. In the crypto space, we've already talked about 2022 being one of, if not the year for GameFi and metaverse to launch. Now, I know we've seen a lot of that and growth has been great for 2021. To a certain extent, I would say gaming really busted on the scene right around the time that the Bored Ape Yacht Club came into play from an NFT standpoint. That's when I think people started really paying attention to gaming from a traditional standpoint, meaning people that were investing in Cardano or Solana or Ethereum started looking at game sequences in terms of investment. So I think that is going to help with this mass adoption. And then, of course, NFT collectibles booming with NFT profile pictures, et cetera, as a stepping stone between the metaverse and real world as the space matures there. And of course, all of that boils down to one thing, and that is utility. Because if we don't see utility in a big way for the use of NFT, and I think that's what we're seeing now with games and also the potential of what digital assets are going to mean in that space. I am on the camp that when you think of just a JPEG or an image as an NFT, that kind of NFT, I believe, is just going to all go to zero. There may be a handful of the brands that might break out of this and go into real world licensing, things of that nature, like a Bored Ape Yacht Club, et cetera, that could make that leverage. Now, that's a bigger challenge to jump that chasm, is to go into licensing, but that would be the one angle I would see. But when you get into utility, that's a different thing. Utility is now gaining access, gameplay, maybe building a digital asset. Now that thing becomes a working NFT. That's a whole different angle, and that is definitely on the move and has a long-term horizon. If you look at this data right here, volume of users of gaming, users numbers experienced exponential growth. You can kind of see the numbers here from June. Just look in June right here. And this is what I was talking about, is the growth capacity. A lot of this is indicative of Axie Infinity and kind of when they broke out, but there is an absolute unhinged approach. And this is just the beginning. We're talking about 1.3, 1.4 million in volume on what they're claiming. And of course, I think what we're going to see in terms of overall users is going to be much higher than this. And I know a lot of you will probably point out in this video that, oh, wait a minute, Paul, Thetan has 5 million users or 5 million gameplays. Axie has, 3.6 million. We know all of those kind of numbers, but I think the key here that Crypto.com is trying to show is the adoption rate in which these game companies are penetrating the market, even though it's still very early and in the beginnings of something big. So I think that is something for us to watch long-term wise and how that might play into this. I want to jump over to a couple of things here. Let me get over to the country slides. All right, so let's jump to this slide right here, top crypto countries. This is based on investment sentiment on our 2022 trajectory. Again, based on overall sentiment, right here, we pulled 121 million. That's in the database when we did our Speech IQ compilation on this. We currently index over 1,000 blockchains and then all of the Binance Smart Chain listings. That's how we pull in those APIs to be able to track this data. But when you look at the countries where sentiment and amplification shows up, you know, the United States leads the way in terms of sentiment, which it should because it is the largest in terms of investors. And Canada, number 2, and also the second largest, even though that's interesting because that's still a very small country compared to the United States. And they're leading as number 2 in terms of total investment sentiment as well. Then you run into Singapore, which jumps a couple of slots up because they are not the 3rd largest investment hub for crypto, but they are the 3rd largest in terms of sentiment around crypto. Now, I feel like a lot of that comes from the gaming and the metaverse side because there's just so many people in the Pacific Asia Rim that are understanding of what's happening in crypto, and I think that's showing out in their numbers here. Great Britain, UK, 7604 coming in at number 4 on sentiment. And then Germany coming in right behind them. And then it kind of goes down the chart all the way down into India and Mexico. And the reason I've got the flags on these are the countries I want you to watch. Canada on the move because of their sentiment and their light regulatory approach. Singapore, I think metaverse and gaming is going to continue to see massive moves here. Now, why is it important to understand where the interest is coming from a global perspective? I want you to think about this because this goes into the strategy you're going to use in terms of investing. When I think Singapore, I am automatically leaning toward Binance Smart Chain projects, meaning you're going to be going and acquiring assets and projects completely different model than what you would do traditionally through an exchange. Completely different. So understanding why that growth is happening there and understanding that metaverse and gaming is kind of becoming the new mecca for what is happening in innovation. Singapore, you've got to watch this one. The other one is Great Britain. Great Britain is and could end up taking over. I want you to, and the reason I say this, look at the ratio of sentiment to amplification on the UK. The UK has flipped. It's a 7611 versus a 7604. Now that's the largest or highest ranked country right now that has the highest sentiment rating and the highest amplification. That tells me there's a lot of growth in the UK coming. The question will be is if they lighten up the legislation side of things, that could be a huge mecca for what we could see in terms of retail investors, retail investment adoption. Again, I wish these were in some of the bigger countries. Now, you think about that retail adoption, that's what I've been talking about here, to get that number up to 600 million investors by the end of 2022. The last 2 countries I want you to pay attention to is India and Mexico. Look at the numbers on India. Not tremendous on sentiment, mainly because I think some of the regulatory pressures that India has placed. But look at the amplification. That means there's a lot of hope in India for what's going to happen in blockchain. In fact, it's flipped to 7263. Same thing down in Mexico at 7211. Again, these are promising numbers for countries that have large populations and either have challenged financial conditions or have massive innovation centers. India being a massive innovation center and Mexico being a challenged population from the finance side of things. So if you kind of weigh out all of these factors, you've got some really cool potentials here for growth in 2022, which could flood in to things like Bitcoin. So I want to look at the next chart, and that is the Bitcoin sentiment by these same or most of these same countries. USA, 7102, not as high as Canada, 7261. People like their Bitcoin in Canada a little bit more. Singapore rising, but I don't expect them to be truly a Bitcoin region because of their interest in metaverse and gaming. And then there is the UK right there at number 1. And this is why, again, I feel like this is going to be a big thing to watch in the UK for how Bitcoin is going to perform. Obviously, you move into Germany, Ireland, and most of the EU. Then you have Australia not performing well, France, Hong Kong, Sweden, and then Japan. And then again, back to India and Mexico. Of course, sentiment was not super high, but the amplification had flipped on both those countries. Mexico seeing a little bit stronger interest, not surprising. India also seeing massive interest in where Bitcoin is going. So when I look at the landscape here, and you look at the population density of these countries, Canada, not so much. Singapore, just because of their sheer size. The UK, okay, yes, if you look at all the European Union. But if I jump over to Mexico and India, those populations can move things. And if we start to see mass adoption in the United States, also in the high 70s here, or in the 70s here on sentiment, then there's some potential here for this kind of growth to happen. So be on the lookout for that, because if those kind of things start to move, we have yet to see the fireworks, I think, for where Bitcoin is going to be going. All right, you guys are listening in over on the podcast. The number one thing you can do right now is jump over right here to the YouTube channel. You're going to get a chance to check out the charts. You'll see a lot of our rollout on how we do our interviews. You'll get a chance to also join in the Diamond Circle, which is a big one, to get access to more of our information, but even more so, it gives you the opportunity and chance to maybe win some digital asset rewards. In fact, we're going to be doing a giveaway tomorrow on our live stream at 3 p.m. Eastern, so make sure and stay tuned for that. If you guys have some ideas for the show, drop them in the links below or hit me up on Twitter at Paul Barron. Catch you next time right here on TechPath.